Hello. All right, so let me get down the names. Thank you for attending. Good afternoon, Jolene. Thank you. You as well. All right. Sorry it's taking me so long. So we're doing the Constitution, right? And notice it's in a different format from usual. Instead of having argumentative sections, making a given point on this one, you are simply putting things into three categories. All right, so it's a different type of assignment. Let's see here. This is great. We have a good turnout today. All right. So what I want to do is I want to send it to the assignment and share that page with you, okay? And see what we have here. So Constitution assignment right here. All right. So please make 3 lists or categories: enlightened, conservative, or pragmatic. And please cite at least 4 examples of each: 4 enlightened facets to the Constitution, 4 conservative ones, and 4 pragmatic ones. From the subsequently presented Constitution of the U.S., make sure that at least 1 section from Article 1, 1 section from Article 2, and 1 section from Article 3 is present in one of the 3 categories. So notice, very simple. I'm asking you to put 4 in each category. And I want Articles 1, 2, and 3 to have at least just one section, right, present in any of the 3. So you don't have to do from all 3 articles in each category, just from all of them combined. All right. So how do I define enlightened? Any element to this Constitution that is ostensibly designed to prevent tyranny. This includes methods of checks and balances of one branch of the government over another, any measure intended to ensure transparency or accountability of officials to the people, limitations to discretionary powers of rulers, and any powers vested in the most democratically elected body, in this case, the House of Reps. A blatant example of this is the Bill of Rights, ensuring citizens' basic rights and freedom. So that's what I mean by enlightened, and we'll get into that shortly, okay? Any questions on that one? So anything really to prevent tyranny, anything to hold the governing officials accountable, any types of checks and balances, anything that withhold or that upholds transparency, accountability, any of that, I would generically term as enlightened. All right, conservative. Any element to this Constitution that seems to conserve early modern or medieval notions, like the following: power vested in a, quote, better sort, or an elite entrusted to use its own discretion without much accountability to the governed, power centralized in a strong central government agency, like a unitary government, as opposed to deliberately weakened and decentralized, what the libertarians wanted. Limited democracy, ruled by the common people, is limited. Strong executive and military resources that can cut short or curtail individuals' freedoms in the name of order and stability. An example of this is that only 1/2 of one branch originally consisted of properly elected officials, and only by those granted citizenship status. So to me, that's an example of a conservative facet to the Constitution. And I ask that you choose 4, okay, for that one as well. Pragmatic, inherently amoral, right? Simply designed for expediency as a compromise between disparate factions, groups of like-minded individuals with similar views and self-interest, etc., or designed to address exigencies like emergencies that could arise, that may arise in the future. An example of this, sadly, may be the tacit acceptance of slavery to placate the planter faction and to ensure their ratification of the document. All right. So with Articles 1, 2, and 3, what I want to do is I want to share a PowerPoint, if I may. But please remember at any time to feel free to, let's see here. Can I not share a PowerPoint? Yeah, there it is. Hello. So for instance, right, the preamble, we the people do ordain and establish this Constitution. So ostensibly, at least, right, sovereignty, where does authority rest? What is the origin of the basis upon which the government can say, you owe allegiance and obedience to us, or as an inanimate object to it, right? To what extent? It states here, we the people do give our consent. So to me, right, that smacks of John Locke's Second Treatise on Government and Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract books, where they talk about the social contract and that authority derives from the consent of the governed. So right off the bat, I think it starts off on an enlightened note. But notice the aims that they had in going away from a decentralized democratic confederation to a more centralized federal republic. It says, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and for the general welfare. All of those to me are conservative aims, right? And then finally at the end, it says, and to secure the blessings of liberty, which is an enlightened reason for having the government, right? But most of the reasons that they give, with the exception of the very last one, are arguably conservative. Establish a greater, tighter union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. Those are all conservative aims, right? In the name of stability and law and order, etc. All right, and then it does Article 1 for a reason on Congress, because it's supposed to be the most democratic of our republic. Remember, Aristotle and Montesquieu defined a republic as a mixed government. It has elements of a monarchy, of a strong chief executive over it. It has elements of an aristocracy. Remember, aristoi meaning the best in Greek. So an elite group of people who are not popularly elected and are not popularly accountable to the people, but are supposed to be the better sort. Sadly, as used, that expression was used by John Adams and by Alexander Hamilton, and then elements of democracy combined, mixed, and demos means the people in Greek, right? So elements of being ruled by the people. So when you look at our different branches, right, you have Congress, which is comprised of the lower house of the House of Representatives and the upper house of the Senate. That's the legislator. They legislate, they write and make laws, right, and pass the laws. Then they have a chief executive in the form of the president who executes or carries out the execution of those laws, the president, vice president, and his or her cabinet. So the chief executive. And then in the third branch, you have the judiciary, the judges, right? So Article 1, they start with Congress. Symbolically going with the most democratic body of the three, at least at that time. So sections 1 through 3, laws require a majority by a two-branch legislator. The reps are to be elected in the House of Reps in the lower house. Remember, in the Senate, they were to be chosen by the state legislators. So it wasn't purely representative democracy with the legislator, right? The citizens would vote for their rep, their voice. And then you had those who had disagreement. To what extent, right, were the conservatives, right? That the question, the proverbial question would be, all right, do you believe that everyone is inherently entitled to the equal protection of the laws, equal economic opportunities, etc.? And of course, that's a rhetorical question. The answer to it should be yes. But then you ask an equally rhetorical question. Do you believe that everyone is equally capable of fixing your car, of writing an English paper for you, of building a house for you? And of course, the answer to that rhetorical question is no, is that people differ in their talents that they're born with, in their talents and skills that they acquire and accumulate in the time that they have here on earth in their formative years. And so hence people are not equally capable of doing everything. And so hence to the conservatives, right, they wanted to ensure that the better sort ruled, that just have, as you have, college prep and honors classes in high school, etc., that you have a certain group of people that, like in the Plato sense, like in Plato's Republic, that just seem to be better at things pertaining to academia. And what you have to remember also is, a lot of the founding fathers had a classical education, and the Greeks and Romans equated education with virtue, which is not necessarily the case as an axiom that we accept now. But back then they did. And so the idea was, right, like in your classical education, I remember having to read in college Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. And he states, right, if you have something that's broken or malfunctioning in some sense, and you sell it to someone, is it tantamount to lying if you don't reveal the extent to which it's broken, and so forth? So there were lots of ethical questions, lots of ethical reasoning involved in a Greco-Roman education, right? Reading the Greco-Roman classics. And so hence they felt that some people are naturally more intelligent, are naturally more gregarious and more socially oriented and intelligent in interacting with fellow man, and that also are better equipped with a good classical education and skilled, in the arts of political science, basically, even though that wasn't a known necessarily, the title of that wasn't around yet. And so to them, right, they use the term stewardship. A steward to me is like a babysitter. You entrust your voice to someone who's better equipped than you are. So I, for myself, right, when I have my car fixed, it gives me great anxiety because I know that it affords an opportunity for them to take advantage of my ignorance and feign a need for me to, to renew certain parts of my engine and et cetera, when such change is not necessarily warranted. Because when I go to those places, I read my book, or I have a loved one pick me up and I go run errands while they're working on my car. I trust someone who is much more skilled than I in fixing my car. And the same thing, right, with stewardship is you entrust the ability of your betters, right, who are better equipped to be able to rule and legislate than you are. And then you had other people that were more liberal for the time being, like, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson, who contended that, well, the average person has sagacity. Look at Athens under Pericles, right, back in Athenian democracy, like around, I want to say roughly 300 BC. I'm probably wrong on that. But at any rate, right, they chose positions by lot, by like a lottery, as to who would serve in juries, but also who would serve in the legislature, et cetera, and preside over their meetings, et cetera. They did it by lot because such was the egalitarian belief that any citizen is just as capable of another. And that's the term they use sometimes with sagacity, that, okay, maybe the average Joe Farmer hasn't read his Aristotle and Plato and hasn't read his Enlightenment works, etc., but he has good common sense. He could see through issues. He could see through people. He has the ability to know and to discern right from wrong. And not to mention, he'll gain practice in doing such, right? And in no time at all, be rather well equipped in governing. And so to them, right, those who are elected ought to be simply a mouthpiece. They ought to simply be like the microphone for those constituents who elected them, that to just basically be a soundboard for what their constituents want, without having that latitude to make his or her own decision with his or her own education and wisdom, etc. So to the liberals, right, they were happy that the House of Reps was directly elected by citizens. But notice, right, that's another conservative or pragmatic facet to the Constitution, is nothing until the 14th Amendment regarding universal citizenship. So they let each state decide for itself who could be a citizen. And of course, if you're African American, if you're a woman, if you're an unassimilated Native American, good luck with that, right? As far as having citizenship rights in your native state. And so the citizens, those who reach citizen status, and by the way, almost always they were white, of English heritage, having been born in the States, and also property holders. They had something known as the stake in society idea, that you couldn't be trusted as a civilian if you didn't have something to lose. And so hence only those who owned a decent amount of property, who demonstrated that type of responsibility and that type of vested interest in their society, and who could be taxed and have that property taxed, that they alone should be trusted with citizenship. So notice pretty conservative by today's standards, a lot of this, right, amongst the founding fathers in 1787. And so notice here, right, the House reps are to be elected every 2 years. So that's pretty enlightened because it keeps them accountable, right? They only have 2 years to do their thing and to make their constituents happy, or they could be ousted in their reelection. You must be inhabitant of the state that you're represented. You must have a house actually in the district that you're representing, right? And that's an enlightened notion that you ought to have as your voice in Parliament and Congress, someone who knows what it's like to live in your region, someone who's been there, who's done that, who knows the issues that are faced by the constituents in that area, right? And not to mention, there's the notion of, well, we know where you live as far as holding you accountable and having property, having a home in the district, the congressional district that you're representing. And then also, right, there's power of impeachment, and whereby the House of Reps can impeach the president, the chief executive. That again is an example of checks and balances. So I would say that that's an enlightened facet to the Constitution. Senators must be inhabitants of their states. So that's kind of enlightened, right? And they get to try impeachments. Another example of checks and balances. They get to make the final decision on removing or not removing the president who is impeached. Then Section 4, Congress must assemble once per year. So it's holding them accountable to address the issues that the people need to be addressed and forcing them to assemble at least once a year. They're to keep a journal of the proceedings and from time to time have them published. To me, that smacks of transparency, of making sure that the people know what their elected reps are up to. And so I find that to be enlightened also. And then Section 6 and 7, no additional office. You can't have a conflicts of interest. You can't be a House rep and also sit on the chief Supreme Court, right? And technically you could under England. And so now you can only have one office at a time and avoid that ability to take advantage of one office to enrich yourself through the other or empower yourself. And then also with a 2/3 supermajority, they could override the presidential veto to any laws that they pass. So hence, technically, they could democratically pass legislation and with a 2/3 majority, regardless of what the president does or doesn't want. All right. But then under Article 1, what I find to be conservative is it says, okay, when you're counting for tax purposes and for representation purposes, how many reps you have. Because remember, you have one rep for every 30,000 civilians. To me, that also is conservative. Only one voice for 30,000 civilians, serving as their mouthpiece in Congress. But it says that you only count free persons, not counting those under servitude, slaves. They were to be counted as 3/5 of a person, right? Notice the 3/5 compromise, and not counting unassimilated Native Americans. And so in that case, right, that's, to me, that's very conservative in delineating how many House reps are to be elected and for what district. All right, any questions or comments so far? So at first, right, not until the 17th Amendment in the 19 teens are senators to be directly elected by citizens. They were chosen by the state legislature, so which was indirect and not tantamount to representative democracy. So to me, that's conservative. Section 5, in their judgment, requires secrecy. So they have to publish from time to time the proceedings of Congress, except in times in which they're, by their judgment, what is spoken about and voted on in Congress ought to be held in secrecy. So that's conservative to me, right? They don't have to be completely transparent with us. And then many strong powers from the states were given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and especially, right, the necessary and proper clause. So notice here in Article 1, Section 8, now Congress has power to borrow money, to regulate trade between the states and with foreign nations, to make laws on naturalization and bankruptcy, to coin money and issue the policy of states and of standard weights and measures, to establish a post office, and to deal with patents, to make the tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. So like the appellate court system and the state level stuff. To define and punish piracies, to declare war, to raise an army, to call forth the militia in case there's an insurrection. And then notice at the bottom, right? To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution any of the enumerated powers just mentioned. And so to me, that's kind of a blank check saying, okay, here's a specified list of what Congress can do, as opposed to the states, right? Which was much more powers than the federal government had under the Confederacy. But you could make the argument, okay, great, at least it's specified. So hence, if it's not specifically stated in Article 1, Section 8, then they cannot do it. Well, the necessary and proper clause gives them that kind of way out, saying, well, in the future, we could use the argument that, well, it's not on this list, but it's necessary and proper for us to do something that is on this list. So we'll get into that soon as far as that being utilized by the conservatives. And then Section 9, there's to be a 20-year gag rule on slavery. So you can't take the floor of Congress and bring up anything on slavery. To me, that's conservative, but also to some people, they might turn that to be pragmatic, that it's amoral and it's a compromise, and that you can't bring anything up on the slave trade either for 20 years. And then pragmatic, sections 8, let's see here, necessary tasks, suppress insurrections, borrow money, regulate interstate trade, deal with bankruptcies and patents and post offices, etc. Notice what I had just said, that you can make the argument that Article 1, Section 8 is conservative because it's given a lot more powers, specified powers to the federal government as opposed to the states being able to do all this, right? So in that sense, it's conservative. But on the other hand, when you look at some of these things, well, yeah, they're going to need a post office. They're going to need to deal with bankruptcies. That's going to happen. So to some people, they see a lot on this list as pragmatic. No, I think it's practical. So please keep that in mind, is there aren't set in stone right and wrong answers when you do this assignment. Sometimes I'll find that you'll put something under pragmatic that I would have put as conservative. That's why the second part, what I want you to do, okay, and you could be brief, it doesn't have to be long at all, but cite exactly the part of the Constitution that you think is enlightened or conservative or pragmatic, and then just in a sentence or two, tell me why you put it in that category. Okay, tell me why you put it in that category. And you could do it very briefly with a simple explanation, and that suffices for me. And I never fail to gain perspective from what you guys turn in, where I'll literally tell myself, you know what, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a good point. That is kind of pragmatic. And I hadn't thought of it as such prior to reading your response. But please, like I said, briefly defend why you put it under that category in each of the 4 instances, or in 4 in each of the 3 categories, so each of the 12 instances. Article 2, what's enlightened about the president? He has to give an oath to the Constitution. To me, that's enlightened, right? Because he doesn't have discretionary or arbitrary power to do whatever he or she wants, but he or she is to be accountable ultimately to the Constitution. And the Constitution derives its authority from what at the very beginning? We the people, or from whom in that case, right? We the people. And so hence, to me, that's an enlightened facet to Article 2 on the president. He approves and executes the laws and can veto, but his vetoes can be overridden with a supermajority. To me, those are examples of checks and balances. So I would entitle that as enlightened as well. He or she is a civilian leader and has power over the armed forces. And in the spirit of checks and balances, Congress raises the army, Congress declares war, and then the president can execute the war as the commander in chief only after those things are done. So again, that's an example of checks and balances to me subjectively. And so I find that to be enlightened, right? So yeah, and the fact that he or she can be impeached, can be removed from office, is an enlightened component to Article 2 as well. And then the State of the Union address, you know, to some people, they find that to be conservative. To some people, they find it to be pragmatic or practical. And then to others, they could even find it in the spirit of checks and balances and sharing and balancing of power as enlightened. I think you could argue any of the 3 categories for the State of the Union address, where the president is to keep Congress apprised of the State of the Union, what his or her administration is up to, and give suggestions to Congress as to what might need to be addressed as far as issues addressed in future legislation. All right. And then regarding the president and the executive branch, what do I find to be conservative? They're to this day not popularly elected. The president is not popularly elected. We've had cases where one presidential candidate received a majority of electoral points and another received the majority of the popular vote. And the one who received the electoral points prevailed, right? So the electoral college system, whereby you had actual electors at first, who the number of whom depended upon the number of congressmen in your state. So remember, you get 1 House rep for every 30,000 civilians, and then you get 2 senators no matter what. So to this day, right, California is worth what? I want to say like 57 roughly electoral points. So at first there were literally 57 individuals, electors, who would go to the state capitol and cast in their vote for the president. So this is indirect. It's not direct representative democracy. And so I find that personally to be conservative, me subjectively. The fact that the president has to be a natural born citizen, to some people that's pragmatic, that's practical. To other people, that's conservative. Why can't a naturalized immigrant run for president? Sections 2 and 3, patronage power. I personally find that to be conservative because kings and queens have been doing that for centuries. And it's a way of putting powerful people in position that are not accountable technically directly immediately to their voters because they weren't elected into office. They were handpicked by the president. So the Secretary of State, right, running diplomatic relations, the Attorney General running law in the court system, the Secretary of the Treasury running the economy, etc. They're handpicked by the president. So to me, that patronage power is certainly conservative. Pardon power. That pardon power was nothing new to monarchs from the medieval and early modern time period, where they had power to pardon whom they willed. And so I find that to be conservative as well. I can't see the rest of it. Sorry, can convene. I'm not sure what that's going to say. Let's see here. And then veto power over Congress. So the properly elected Congress, at least the properly elected House, and now the Senate is properly elected as well. They can pass something, but the president can veto it. And without a 2/3 majority, they cannot override it. So I find that, you might find that to be enlightened because, again, that's a spirit of checks and balances. I happen to put it subjectively under conservative because crowns had had veto power for centuries prior to this over their legislators. And then pragmatic, treaty power, patronage power. Notice I put patronage power under conservative. So some of these, I think you could put in at least one of two, if not three categories. Patronage power, right? To me, that's practical as well. You need ambassadors to foreign countries. You need someone to help run the economy as a Secretary of Treasury, et cetera, et cetera. And so I found that also to be pragmatic or practical. And then miscellaneous. Article 6 says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not a person. To me, I find that to be enlightened, right? That the Constitution constitutes the supreme law of the land. Articles 3, 4, and 6, the Supreme Court justices are appointed for good behavior, for life. Some would even put that as enlightened again, because it's in the spirit of checks and balances, having the House reps properly elected and having the Supreme Court justices handpicked for life. Others would say, no, that's practical because the House reps ideally are going to do what's popular if they want to stay in office, happen to run for re-election every 2 years. So you need someone who's going to look out for the numerical minority, right? And can make the unpopular decisions that need to be made. I'm thinking of, like, in the future, Brown versus the Board of Education, right? If they had a popular referendum in Kansas as far as segregating Black kids, I think it would have democratically easily passed. But we know in hindsight, right, and we hold it by our standards today, that was immoral, that was wrong, that the majority were in the wrong. And so hence the Supreme Court, knowing that they didn't have to run for re-election, they didn't have to decide what was popular, they could protect the numerical minority, and they could protect African-American students in that unpopular decision that we hold to be the right decision, right? In Brown versus the Board of Education, ending school segregation. So the amendment process, I think, is practical. They open up the possibility of making future amendments into the Constitution, because the founding fathers were not seers, right? They were not prophets. They didn't know everything that the country would face in the future. And so hence they wanted to give future generations the opportunities to address unforeseen future issues and problems and obstacles and situations by making new amendments in the future. So I think that's practical personally, that it's pragmatic. And then, of course, I say the Bill of Rights, I think, is clearly enlightened because it's putting into stone, if you will, the natural rights of the individual citizen here in the US. All right. So are there any questions as far as what I'm asking of you on this assignment? All right. And so could I get a thumbs up? Could I get a thumbs up from some of you that you've been able to hear me, you've been following me, you've got this. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Tricell. All right.
Your explanation works so far. I just haven't had time to look at
The actual Constitution. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And notice, Savon, I have the Constitution itself. I have it copied and pasted on the assignment itself as well.
Okay, nice.
All right. So yeah, you don't need to. And also, it's in the back of your textbook as well. But yeah, see here, I copied and pasted it.
Okay, so we just have to read through each article and put them in, categorize them.
Yes, and note, right? All you're doing is choosing 4 examples of each. So don't feel like you have to painstakingly apply every section that you read under one of the 3 categories. To me, that's too laborious and too time consuming.
Okay, yeah, that is. So that's good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm always trying to find the balance, right? I'm wanting you to try to be somewhat thorough with every assignment and look through, but I'm not trying to torture anybody. That would just, because to me, you're already doing the level of difficulty as far as categorizing them. You don't need the tedious monotony of doing every single section. All right, and so if you guys don't have any other questions, that I'm pretty much done for today, if that's okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything. Thanks for making it real clear. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Savon. I appreciate your feedback. Yeah, I'm going a little bit mad at home. I'm very eager to get back into the classroom, and so this is the closest thing I get, is being able to have Zoom videos with you guys. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and quit sharing and go ahead and turn off the meeting if there aren't any other questions. Good luck with your assignments, okay? And have a good week. Be safe.
Thank you for the lecture,
you
Mr.
too.
Cowell.
You're very welcome, Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Appreciate you guys.